Hello, my name is Christopher Thomas. I am the data compliance analyst with the Office for the Homelessness Coalition. This is a brief training about recording chronic homelessness in Empower Lancaster using the HUD Universal Assessment. There will be a few slides we'll go through, and then I'll move over to Empower Lancaster and show you what these fields look like and how to fill them out. So it's important that we accurately capture chronic homelessness, and Empower Lancaster is how we do that. HUD defines chronic homelessness as a person being homeless either for consecutive months, 12 or more months, or cumulatively homeless for that long over the course of 3 years over 4 or more episodes. So it's those two things, either consecutive months homeless, cumulative months homeless, plus disability status. So when we look at the HUD Universal Assessment, those are the fields we're going to see that we'll need to fill in accurately if we want to show clients as being chronically homeless. There's never going to be just a field that we can select yes, no, unfortunately. We're going to need to have some more information for Empower Lancaster to calculate that for us. But it's really important that we get this information accurately because this is one of the things that HUD is going to be looking at every year when they determine how great the need in Lancaster County is. So if we're not capturing chronic homelessness, or if we're underreporting chronic homelessness, it is going to appear as though Lancaster County is less needy, needs less funding than it actually does. So if you look back at the last few years, we have historically not done a great job of capturing chronic homelessness on the PIT count, which is one of the places this shows up. In the last 2 years, we reported 0 chronically homeless people. 3 years ago, we were only reported 3. This year in 2023, we did report 38 people, but that is still fairly low considering how many people we reported overall, like a low rate of chronic homelessness. Some of that might have to do with ERAP, other COVID era projects that helped get people housed and kind of broke their streak of homelessness, so to speak. So they might not have been chronically homeless during part of that time, but to report 0 is probably way too low, right? So we need to get a better handle on this in the coming year so that a year from now we are getting something closer to an accurate number. So again, the factors we're looking at is how long has this client been homeless? And that can mean unsheltered or sheltered homeless, right? So on the street or living in a shelter project, or cumulative. So if a person's episodically homeless, it's going to look for the number of episodes and the cumulative length. So it's 4 or more episodes over the course of 3 years, totaling 12 or more months, meets that second criteria, plus disability status. Disability status can be as simple as asking a client, do you have a disability? But there is a list we can get from HUD. They are the disabilities we would expect: physical disability, mental illness, PTSD, chronic illness, the same ones that we ask questions about in EL. But for the HUD Universal Assessment, we're not asking for details. We don't need to know which disability. All we need is to have disability yes or disability no. Um, And of course, you have other options too. And clients are under no obligation to answer these questions. If a person says, I don't know, they refuse to answer, or were unable to ask for some reason, there are doesn't know, refused, data not collected options too, of course. The other questions just are what I just said, basically. It's going to ask for a date homelessness started, is one of the questions it'll ask. And EL is just going to take the date you give it and subtract that from today's date. And if it's been more than a year since this person was homeless, they will meet that criteria. And then the same goes for the 2 questions about number of times. We have never, of course, up to 4 or more, and the cumulative length. So how many months cumulatively, altogether, has this person been homeless over the last 3 years? Does it total 12 or more months? And if so, if they have that plus 4 or more times, they will meet that criteria. Um, this is a view of, and we'll see something similar. I'll show this to you live in EL, but these things are not set in stone, right? So if you are unable to ask a question at intake and you ask it the next day, 3 days later, you do get that information about when this person became homeless, how long they've been homeless for, and are they disabled. You can always go back to assessments, HUD, HUD Universal. So this is the pathway you would follow in EL to get back to these. They call them HUD Universal Assessment for a reason. So nearly every program in EL will have this assessment as one of the first things that you do. So when you go to this HUD Universal Assessment, you're going to see one basically for every entry this person ever had. Person could be new, they might not have any, but a person may have been in the system for 10 years or more. So they may have this question been asked many times. And you'll also see on that screen a person's chronic homeless status can change. Of course, if they are housed, if they leave homelessness um, for even several months and then return to the street, they might no longer meet the criteria for being chronically homeless. So these things can change. Um, just because someone was once chronically homeless does not mean that they always will be. And of course, vice versa. A person can become chronically homeless once they meet those criteria. One thing we'll look at is copying assessments. This is an option. Um, I think, especially given that we haven't had the most accurate assessments rather, it would be better for us to ask these questions, or at the very least, to check the answers after you've copied them to make sure that they're accurate. Because a person's housing status can change, and it's important that we get accurate information. The other really important thing, and I really should have led with this, that I think has had the biggest effect on our ability to fill this out properly, is that all these fields most of them are going to be under the heading prior living situation. And I think that has caused some problems for us because how you interpret those words is going to do a lot to determine how you answer them, right? So I think it's natural to see prior living situation and think that it means most recent stable living situation, meaning when this person was last housed, where were they housed? That is not what those words mean. HUD says that this field is intended to reflect the client's last living situation immediately prior to their start date. In other words, for many clients, what we're going to be asking is, where did you sleep last night? Before you came to this shelter project, before your start date here, what was your living situation? Were you in a car? Were you in a different shelter? Were you in a different project altogether that you ended up back on the street? Um, we didn't choose the term prior living situations. What HUD uses, it could change someday, but right now it's what we've got. So we really want to be asking is the client, before you came in here, where were you living? Not what was the last place you were living housed, right? So it's really, really important. I'm going to stop sharing this and move over to EL to show you what I'm talking about. So really quick, we'll just review what I said a second ago, which is if you go, you're in here, you're looking at your client. We're looking at Sheldon right now, our test client. So if you ever want to mess around and look at this stuff, Sheldon's test client's always a good place to go because there's lots of assessments in here, lots of enrollments. You can take a look at what this looks like. But if I wanted to go back and either look at Sheldon's chronic homeless status or update an assessment that I put in there previously, I would go over here to assessments, HUD, HUD Universal. And this will now show me a list of every HUD Universal assessment in EL for Sheldon when the assessment was completed, and what was his chronic status, right? So all of the assessments have been filled out. For Sheldon at this point, have chronic no. We can take a look at one here and see why that might be. So here we see that Sheldon's client was put in here with disability, no, and prior living situation, rental by client without subsidy. This is saying that he did not stay for less than 7 nights, so he was there for over a week. And how long was he there? He was there for a year or longer. So again, this is why it's really important that we think of prior living situation not as prior stable living situation or last housed living situation, but where was this client before they came to your project? What is their where did they sleep last night? Is basically the best way to think about it. So EL right now, not only is Sheldon not disabled in here, but it also is judging that when Sheldon came into this project, he was not homeless because he was in a rental that he was paying for over a year, right? So as far as this HUD Universal Assessment is concerned, he is not. He was not homeless before he came to us. He may have become homeless today, and he's being assessed, right? So that would be accurate, right? He still wouldn't be chronically homeless because he would have been stably housed before he came in. But for many of our clients, especially given how long it takes to get into some projects, the chances of a person coming directly from a housed situation is pretty low, right? Now, what I'm going to do quickly is run us through an enrollment from the top and show you that this was going to appear somewhere in the enrollment workflow, like I said, for basically every project in EL because it's required by HUD. And that'll give us a chance to mess around with some of these fields, and that'll hopefully illustrate what I mean when I'm talking about this. So we're going to enroll a client. We're just going to enroll Sheldon again. I just happen to know that this information is all filled in, so we shouldn't get any errors when we try to save. We're now going to run through a few extra screens. Sheldon's test client doesn't have any other family members who we need to add, so we can move on from here. He already has a consent in the system, so we're good there too. This is where you would select what program you're enrolling Sheldon into. So this is going to look a little bit different for you. I'll have more options. I'll have a different provider, but just for the sake of argument, let's assume we're enrolling Sheldon in Tenfold's emergency shelter project. So I'm going to save that. We're enrolling him today, so it's 6/29. That's accurate. We don't have to enroll any family members because he's single. And now we're going to move into the assessments. So again, we're going to choose not to copy Sheldon's assessments. We're going to be working with the blank fields here. Now, if you had selected yes, you would have had the option of looking at what other HUD Universal assessments has Sheldon completed, and you could select one as long as there was one that was near to today's date. That would be okay. Just ask that you make sure to check it and verify that the information is accurate. So we're going to set Sheldon's location. We're going to ask Sheldon, does he have a disability? And Sheldon says, yes, I do have a disability. And now again, we're going to ask, where were you living before you came in? What was your prior living situation? And Sheldon has been in a place not meant for human habitation. He's been staying in his car. Now we're going to ask, how long was he in that situation? So Sheldon, we're going to say, has been in this situation for more than 90 days, but less than 1 year. And then we ask the question of how long have you been homeless? So Sheldon says it's been less than 1 year. Let's say Sheldon's been on the street since New Year's Day of this year. And there's two questions left. Questions about how many times has this client been homeless in the last 3 years, and how many months total have you been homeless in the last 3 years? So let's assume here that Sheldon has actually been homeless multiple times, 4 or more times in the last 3 years, for a total of over 12 months. This is going to create, when we save this, this would create a chronic homelessness yes for Sheldon on that HUD Universal Assessment. Okay, and to show what I mean, we will look over here. So we're going to go to Assessments, HUD, HUD Universal for Sheldon. And here we see the HUD Universal Assessment that we just filled out on 6/29/23. Here's the program it was associated with, and here's his chronic homeless yes status. Again, we can edit this by clicking the gear and then edit, and we should see all of our responses from a minute ago. We can change any of these and save any response. Any assessment belonging to you should be able to edit after the fact. All right, and now as a final note here, we're going to rewind. We are working Sheldon through the enrollment workflow. We're going to be enrolling him into an emergency shelter project. I just want to show you what it would look like if you had copied assessments. So as we move through the workflow, when we get to the assessment section, we're going to be prompted with this question: do you want to copy all assessment data? So this time we'll say yes. We'll see what assessments are available for us to copy from for Sheldon. This will let us look to see what sets of assessments does Sheldon have in the system, right? They're all dated. So we're going to look for the most recent entry assessment because the HUD Universal gets asked at entry. This is 6/13, a little over 2 weeks ago. So we're going to select this one. We're going to copy the assessment. And now it'll take a second to think, and we'll see what gets copied over. So this is the assessment we looked at a minute ago, or a few minutes ago, where Sheldon had disabling condition, no, residence was rental by client for a year or longer. So this would be an opportunity to check to make sure that this is still accurate, that before the client is entering into your project, where they slept last night, most likely, what was it? Or was Sheldon actually staying in a rental of his own that he'd been in for a year or longer? Or was he in fact in a homeless situation, which we would find closer to the top of this menu? How long was he there? When did his homelessness start? How many times? How many episodes of homelessness has he experienced in the last 3 years? And how many months cumulatively has he been homeless in the last 3 years? This is an example of something that might happen. So the fields that were copied over, just the first two fields here were copied. We don't have his date homelessness started, number of times, or cumulative length. So I'm not going to be able to proceed from here anyway. So you would have to ask those questions, if we're using this example, to move on in the workflow. So this is a good opportunity to make sure that the information in here is accurate. If not, this is your chance to change it so they get the correct information for this client before you move on to the other assessments, which, assuming that they were also part of the entry assessment you copied, information will also be in these other assessments copied over as well. Thank you all for your time. Just to quickly review, we went over how to use the HUD Universal Assessment in Empower Lancaster to record chronic homeless status for clients. The most important points are that chronic homelessness is based upon disability status, disability yes, disability no, and length of time homeless. So 12 or more months of consecutive homelessness, or 12 or more months of episodic homelessness over 4 or more episodes over the course of 3 years are what calculates chronic homelessness. EL is set up to ask you those questions when you work through a client's enrollment. The important thing to remember with the enrollment is that when we talk about prior living situation in EL, what we're really talking about is, where was this client living immediately before they entered your project, or came to you, right? So basically, where they living last night is what that is asking, not what was their most recent stable house living situation. This can be edited by going to Assessments, HUD Universal, and then finding the assessment, clicking the gear and selecting Edit, then Save. So if you don't get to ask these questions until after the enrollment is completed, that's okay. That's how you would go back to edit that. And on that same screen, you would see whether or not a person was chronically homeless, whether it was calculated chronically homeless, yes, would appear there. Any questions about this, feel free to email me at cthomas@lchra.com. You can also call me at the phone number on the screen. Thank you all for your time.